voice is making it. Yay! All right. So I have been really playing with movement a lot lately, even more so than I normally do. And I've been playing with just like really traditional yoga sun salutations. I've just been playing with sun salutations, and every time I am doing my sun salutations, I just think of it from a different perspective. So sometimes I do it from the hips, sometimes I do it from the front of the core, sometimes I do it from the back of the core. So I kind of have been inspired of like just having that approach for a while of it won't always be like the same sun salutation, but pretty general stuff. Play with it a little bit from time to time, but looking at the same basic movements from a different perspective week to week, and really shifting the practice into a whole different experience, even though the movements that we do may be at times the same exact movements, just a very different approach each time. So what makes sense to me from what I have been kind of studying for the past year, 2 years, is to start with the breath. So this week, we're going to concentrate on breathing, and we're going to concentrate with breathing in just very basic movements. And then next week, we'll have a different approach, probably core, and then we'll go from there. So with that, it would be helpful to have 2 blocks. If you don't have 2 blocks, 1 block will work. If you don't have 1 block, there are other things that you do. So we're going to start in the most basic position, the position where you can feel the breath the position of where, when you are first born into this world, your mother usually places you, which is on your back. So we're going to use the constructive rest position, and that is lying flat on your back with your feet wider than your hips so that your knees can knock in towards each other. And this allows for the space of your lower belly to release. It allows the muscles that would normally hold the legs up to not be active, or it's not necessary to be active. And to begin, I'm just going to check in with the state of our breath in this moment. So bring one hand to your lower belly and bring one hand to your upper chest. And I say this a lot, and I will say it again. Try your best not to change your breath, to just breathe in the fashion that feels most natural in this moment, in this position, in accordance with the day that you have led up into this moment. And just begin by noticing where you feel your breath more predominantly. And this can be any kind of sensation. It might be the movement of the breath beneath your hands. It might be that you're more aware of the breath coming in and out through your nose. So just notice where you can sense your breath the most. And again, you all have been working with me for a while. You may know the quality of breath that I often cue, but the way that we can begin to find change in our breath or motivate change in our breath is to become aware of how we normally breathe. So just stay with where you are normally. Notice how much natural movement you feel in the space beneath your hand on your chest. And if you do feel movement in this area, notice what this movement is like. Notice if you feel a lifting of the upper chest, maybe the collarbones lift up towards your chin as you take a breath in. Maybe there's more of a general expansion forward rather than upward. So just kind of notice. And if you don't feel any movement in this area, don't bring it there. Noticing if you feel the breath move more predominantly under the space of your hand on your belly. How would you describe this movement? Do you feel it more as a movement forward and back, pushing the lower belly forward? Or do you feel it more as a general spreading across the front? And again, if you don't feel it there, no need to try and describe it or force it. And then, regardless of where you feel the breath move more in your body, you should be aware of your breath coming in through your nostrils. So it comes in and out through the nostrils. Does it make a sound? Does it have a consistent rate? Rhythm? Do you feel one side of your breath longer than the other, or are they even? And then, just in general, all over, notice the quality of your breath. Noticing, is the breath smooth? Are the inhalations smooth the whole way through? Are the exhalations smooth the whole way through? What is the transition between your inhalations and exhalations? Do you feel a transition? Is it quick and jerky? Is it smooth and almost imperceptible? Is there a pause? And obviously, the longer we sit with our breath, the more it changes. But allow those changes to be naturally natural rather than forced. Just stay a few more moments with your breath. In the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Sutra 1.2 is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which in English translation says yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of your mind. So in other words, the true purpose of yoga is to stop that crap that keeps coming through our mind endlessly, distracting us and not stopping completely. But the recognition of when we go down the rabbit hole, how can we shift? the chitta, the mind, off, or off the fluctuations. And in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it talks about the relationship between chitta, the mind, and prana, energy. And prana is breath. It's one form of energy. And that when the mind races, the prana races. And the best way to calm the mind is to calm the prana, tame the prana. So subtle breathing, rather than big breathing, is taming or calming the prana to calm the mind. Shift your hands to the sides of your rib cage, allowing your fingers to rest on that curve. I like to think of the curve of the rib cage as kind of the bottom of a heart, and how the heart kind of points downward, where is pointing up towards our heart. So just rest your fingers on that curve and the heels of the hands on the sides of the rib cage. So we've become aware of our own prana, our natural prana. Let's work on calming or taming the prana, subtle breathing. Begin by bringing awareness of the inhale, staying light, so not making the breath bigger. As you feel a subtle expansion of the lower rib cage out towards the hands as you inhale. And a release of the hands, the ribs away from the hands as you exhale. So resisting that urge to make your breath bigger. And instead, just think of it slowly trickling deep into the lungs, all the way down to the bottom of the lungs. And a slight expansion outward. A slow drawing in as you exhale. Begin to notice if you feel that one side fills easier or more fully than the other side. Just chalk it up as one of those, isn't that interesting? And bring awareness back to the breath as it enters and exits through the nose. Feeling first the sensation of the inhale and the exhale as it enters and exits. And then begin to think about making it lighter. So you may slow down the rate at which you breathe in, the rate at which you breathe out. That will reduce the sensation of the breath at the nostrils. You may think of trying to make it as quiet as possible. You may think of the image of a feather beneath your nose. And as you inhale and exhale, creating as little turbulence so that the feather barely moves at all. By this time, you're probably starting to feel slight sensation of air hunger. But see if you can stick with it. If you do feel the urge to take a bigger breath in, you can do so, but then on your next exhalation, hold for a count of 5, and then see if you can return back to the subtle breathing. This is the body's natural response as it starts to build up tolerance to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is necessary for many functions of the body. We think of it as a toxin, and in high doses, as in its rawest form, it is so, but carbon dioxide has many functions of the body, and one of them is actually regulating the nervous system. So building up tolerance through subtle breathing, low, slow, light, is the first step. Walk your feet together, shift to either side, and press yourself. You may notice that this has a calming response on your nervous system, hopefully, even with that awareness of air hunger. And we're going to come into a seated position. If you can, be on your knees, seated on a block. That's going to put your spine in a little bit more of an upright position. But if you need to just sit, this is fine as well. So coming back to hands on your ribs, I sometimes like to just wrap my hands across and give myself a little hug. We're going to come back into that sense of subtle breathing. So making sure that your sit bones are seated on the prop, so on the block, noticing if you're rocking forward or back and finding more of that neutral. Lower rib cages in. So if your hands are there, you can use them gently to push the ribs inward so that your rib cage mirrors your pelvic bowl. Chin tucked, neck long, broaden across the collarbones as much as you can with your arms wrapped around. Eyes can be open and gaze forward, or eyes can be closed. Rest the tongue on the roof of your mouth gently. And then come back into that subtle breathing. So starting with the awareness of the breath coming in and out through the nostrils. And trying to quiet the breath as much as you can. Feeling that sensation of your rib cage at the bottom, growing broad all the way around, especially the side and the back of the rib cage. And then keeping the awareness of the ribs moving out, remove the hands. Soften any tension you feel in your neck or throat. We're going to continue to build on this concept of building tolerance to carbon dioxide, which sounds counterintuitive, but trust me, if you want to know more, I'm more than willing to tell you more, but for sake of time, not here. So inhale through your nose. Exhale through your nose. And plug your nose with your fingers and hold for a count of 3. Let it go. Breathe in normally through your nose. So not gasping for that next breath. Exhale normally out through your nose. Inhale normally through your nose. Exhale out normally. Plug your nose with your fingers and hold for a count of 3. Let it go. Breathe in normally. Exhale normally. So you're going to continue this. You do 1 cycle of holding the nose at the end of the exhale, holding for a length of time that you feel comfortable holding. If you can hold it for 3, you can stay there. If you need to lessen it, you can lessen it. What lets you know how long it should be is the inhalation that follows should not be big. Should just be a normal breath in. If you feel that it has to be big, shorten the pause. If you feel that you can lengthen it, you can start to lengthen it by 1 count until you get to about a count of 5. So you're taking a normal breath in and a normal breath out, plugging your nose, holding for your count. And then you'll follow it with just a regular breath cycle. So inhaling normally, exhaling normally, and then going again with the pause. And so the pause is where our body ideally should move into more of the parasympathetic state. If our thermostat is set on more of a sympathetic response, this exhalation with the pause will not naturally feel relaxing. So going with a sense of ease, with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of letting go, softening, will eventually lead to that response of softening, of relaxing on the exhale. And do about 3 more rounds of this. So a full round will include the plugging of the nose, followed by a regular inhale, exhale. You're trying to maintain more of that subtle breath rather than thinking of trying to breathe bigger or fuller. And once you've finished the 3 cycles, just return both of your hands down to your thighs and just take a moment to notice shifts in the mind and the breath and the body. And so breathing bigger can sometimes be connected, if it's consistently bigger, to kind of an amped up nervous system, which can show up as anxiety. It can show up as also pain and discomfort. Carbon dioxide, one of the purposes of carbon dioxide is it actually helps to vasodilate, which means open up things that make the blood flow more fully, more completely. So when we're not tolerant of carbon dioxide, we can tense all the way around. Bring your hands down beside your body and open your eyes. So we're going to start to take some of this concept now to movement. So turn your hands out and inhale your arms over your head and just notice what you notice. Like, what is your natural tendency with your breath when you move your arms over your head? As you exhale, bring it down. So before, again, you start to adjust, first we become aware. Like, what is our natural tendency? How do we normally respond to arms over the head, of lifting the chest and opening the ribs? If you're like me, my breath automatically, my inhalation automatically gets longer or bigger. I can once again hear my breath. So I've gone out of that quiet state and more into my natural tendency towards ujjayi breath, which is that breath where you tense the back of your throat and you make yourself hear your breath, which is not something that's bad. It's just not what we're doing today. It might be what you're doing right now. So just notice it. And then continue this movement and start to see if you can quiet it to use that more subtle breathing. And as you start to shift more into that subtle breathing, what do you notice about the rate of your movement? And you might be feeling a lot of sensations, like maybe it's really hard to bring your arms over your head using a subtle inhalation. Just notice it. Maybe the exhalations with the movement of the hands, you find it easier to lengthen them. I'm only saying that because that's what I find. And then rest your hands back on your thighs, close your eyes, and just notice. One of the things that I noticed is that my heart rate has increased. And I'm trying to use my subtle breathing to bring my heart rate back down. And just notice how fast or how challenging that may be. And shift forward. Remove your block. If you have 2 blocks, go ahead and drop them just up at the front of your mat, but off of your mat, and come into tabletop. So knees can be slightly behind your hips, shoulders above your hips, shoulders above your wrists. Chin tucked, neck long, collarbones wide. Find neutral in your pelvis and the ribs. I'm pausing here just to find first a subtle breath. Seeing if you can find the rib expansion all the way around, front, back, sides. And then starting to move gently with your breath. Match your cat and cow with your subtle breath. Notice what your body wants to do. Kind of our natural habits. I feel like I have to push all my air out when I exhale in this, which tends to speed it up. But if I try to stay with that subtle breath, I find a more complete integration with my spine. Push back into child's pose. Toes touch, knees wide. Let your hands stack and rest your forehead on your hands. And sometimes when we can compress the belly, the breath also becomes compressed. Keep it low. Keep it slow. Resist the urge to make it bigger.
Reach the arms forward. Spreading fingers towards the front of your mat, creating a little bit more movement. So as you inhale, shift up to tabletop. Go with your low, slow, and light breath.
Feeling for expansion of the ribs. As you exhale, press back into downward facing, or to child's pose. Can you keep the exhale quiet? Noticing those tendencies towards air hunger. Respecting when you need to take that fuller breath in, but seeing, can you go back to it? Next time you lift forward, tuck your toes under and lift back to downward facing dog. So cycling through these movements, tabletop to child's pose, and tabletop to down dog. And the next time you come into down dog, pause and down dog. Notice sensation, heart rate, how the breath changes in this position with your head down, the organs of the belly kind of moving up towards the diaphragm. Does it become harder to maintain that low, slow, and light breath? And quiet breath. Then walk your hands back towards your heels, bending your knees, and roll all the way up. Walk to the front of your mat. So we're coming further away from the ground. We're asking more of our body to work to stabilize us. So just kind of noticing, we were on our knees doing our arms and over the head and down. We're going to do that in a standing position. So feet hip distance apart, ground down through your feet, fronts of the legs strong. So you want to stabilize in your lower body, which is going to give a little bit more kind of freedom in your upper body, but we'll also position the hips in neutral. So notice if they tilt forward, our back, find more of that neutral, ribs over your hips, collarbones broad, chin in, neck long. And just start first by finding your natural breath. Start to notice the quality of your natural breath as you come up to standing. Tongue resting on the roof of your mouth. Start to slow your breath down, start to quiet your breath. So finding more of the subtle breathing. And turn the palms away from your body. Reach the arms over your head. And then bring them down beside your body. So just do this a couple of times with your natural breath. What your kind of go-to is when you normally do this in a yoga class. So trying not to overthink it, just feel natural. Notice what happens to your ribs. Notice what happens to your belly. Notice what happens to your chest. Notice what happens to your breath. Notice the rate. How fast do you go? And then start to quiet your breath. Think of taking the inhalation deep into your lungs. What one of my natural tendencies is that I find when I do this, I naturally chest breathe. And when I consciously try to take it deeper into my lungs, deep into the diaphragm, I can actually find it quiet and slow. And we're going to add on. So come back to standing. Just take a moment to feel. Noticing your heart. I'm going to start to take this into a forward fold. So traditional sun salutation, we do arms overhead. So inhale with that low, subtle breath, arms overhead. As you exhale, bend your knees, hinge from your hips, fold forward, and bring your hands to your blocks. Let the head fall. Take a couple of breaths here. Every time I go into a forward fold position, I automatically revert to that really loud exhale. Just trying to quiet it down. Press hands into the block and lift up halfway, straightening the legs. Find your cues, chin tucked, neck long, collarbones broad, fronts and backs of the pelvis in neutral, ribs in. Exhale, fold. Can you use a slow, low, light inhale to lift back up? Exhale, bring hands to heart. Bring the hands back to your side. And we'll do this combination for a few rounds. Rotate the palms open. Slow, low, light inhale, arms over your head. Bending your knees, hinge from your hips. Slow, long, quiet exhale, hands to the blocks, head drops. Slow, low, light inhale, press hands down, lift up halfway. Long, slow, quiet exhale, fold. Finding your cues as you come up helps to bring the breath into that slow, low, light as you come all the way up. And then hands to heart. So we're going to do this for 3 rounds on your own. Seeing if you can stay with low, slow, light, and adjusting the speed that you need to be able to maintain it. Noticing those areas where you feel the air hunger. Noticing the points where it gets a little challenging. Noticing if there's anything you can do to adjust it. when you finished your final round. And if you're not there, take your time. Just allow yourself to come into mountain pose, Tadasana. Noticing the quality of your mind, how your body feels, your heart rate, and your breath. So noticing if the vrittis are becoming a little slower. So I'm going to go to the next part of Sun Salutations, and we'll use these same movements to get ourselves there. You want to let it go. You can kind of shake a little side to side, maybe do a little dance. Sometimes we just have to let it all go. I find that this helps me. Sometimes getting too stuck in my breath and in my mind makes me too tense. So sometimes more movement. And then noticing as the more movement happens, how my breath responds, and then slowing down the movement to slow down the breath. Rotate palms open. Slow, low, light arms over your head. Quiet, slow, hinge, fold. Resist the urge to take that big breath. That's where I want it. Up halfway. Exhale, fold. Remove the blocks and come to hands and knees. So plank pose. Plank pose is a pose that can increase the breath, right? It can increase our heart rate. It can increase our tensing of the breath. So we're going to do it with your hands on your blocks at the middle level. So taking your blocks to the middle level, hands on the blocks, gripping the fingers on the side and the thumbs on the inside. Just going to walk our hips back. And we're, instead of doing full plank, we're going to do knee plank. So shoulders are above your wrist still, but your hips are going to drop so that your hips are in line. We're going to find our cues first. So chin tucked, neck long, broaden across the fronts of your collarbones. Notice your natural tendency of your rib cage here. Has it jutted forward? What happens if you bring the front of the ribs down and in? Notice also the pelvis. Notice where your hip points point. Do they point more down towards your thighs, more towards your ribs, or straight forward? So kind of find your cues. And then shift to your breath. So feeling in this position, and if too much weight is on your wrist, you can come down to your elbows on your blocks, which is tricky to do when you're already in that position. So you might have to come to hands and knees and do it. But can you find that rib expansion on the sides and the back here? And then can you start to quiet it down? Take a break. So bend your hips back. Take your elbows onto your blocks and do some cat-cows. Sinking your cat-cow to your low, slow breath. And then come back to your hands on your blocks. Shoulders above your wrist, back your knees up, and Shoulders above your wrist. Chin tucked, neck long. So that front neck core is engaged. Lower ribs down and in. Fronts and backs of the pelvis in neutral. Tongue is in the roof of the mouth. And you're finding that low breath in the lungs. Expansion of the side and back ribs. Inhale into your side ribs. As you exhale, just bend your elbows as far as you can towards your hips. And then press back up. So you're going to do this with your breath. You're inhaling to prepare, exhaling to move. Inhaling back up, exhaling to move. I'm going to watch. Keep your chin tucked, neck long, so don't move your head. It stays in line with your spine. Your spine is strong and stable from the abdominal pressure created by your diaphragm. You're not moving fast. You're still trying to do that low, slow, and light. And when you lose the low, slow, and light, you're done with the push-ups. So when you're done, sit back in child's. If you feel that increase in heart rate, that means you're done. If you're losing any of your cues, that means you're done. And once you come back into child's pose, how long does it take you to go back into that natural state of the low, slow, and low? And as you use your breath to come back into that state, notice what happens to your heart rate. The breath, the body, the mind are intimately linked, and we can use any of those entryways in to affect all of those parts. Prana, in the form of the breath, happens to be the most probably effective way. Shift back to hands and knees. Remove the blocks out of your way. Come into, again, that kind of knee plank position, shoulders above your wrist, finding your cues. Notice what usually the pelvis kind of either tilts forward or back. Find neutral. And then bend your elbows back as you slowly, with that long, slow, low, quiet exhale, lower all the way down to your belly. Interlace your fingers and rest your forehead in the hole that you make with your fingers and your thumb. Press down through your forearms. Find your cues, chin tucked towards your throat. Lift the sternum so your breastbone up to broaden across the fronts of your collarbones. Take a few breaths here, finding low, slow, light. Notice what the breath's tendency to do is when you come onto your belly with slight extension in your spine. Sometimes this can have an effect on the breath, so just notice if it does. And then come into Sphinx pose. So elbows underneath your shoulders, palms spread. Find your cues, chin tucked, neck long, collarbones broad. Pelvis in neutral, ribs in. Notice what happens in response to this position. For me, it shows up in my tongue. Like all of a sudden, my tongue gets really rock solid hard. My throat, my jaw. And I can't breathe low. Well, I can, but my natural tendency is to breathe into my chest. So find low, slow, and light. Finding that expansion of your ribs all the way around. Especially the side and back ribs. I also find that my breath gets really loud in this position. I'm trying to quiet it down. Release. Forehead to the floor, hands come under the shoulders. Press up to hands and knees. Tuck the toes under and press up and back into downward facing dog. So we've already been in this position once with our low, slow, light breath. But we've just done a lot of movement to the spine, a lot of movement in general. Come high up onto your toes. Bend your knees straight forward as you lift and spread your sit bones. Notice how your hip points rest on your thighs. Lift them slightly away from your thighs. So finding neutral in your pelvis without flattening your lower back. Firm the front of your thighs as you straighten and then lower your heels towards the ground. So finding a neutral pelvis. So the pelvis is neither tucked or the hips are neither tucked nor they're neutral. So you have a slight curve in your low back. Notice the tendency to drop your rib cage towards the floor, lower ribs in, down. Find your low, slow, light. 3 breaths. On your next exhalation, slowly walk your hands to the back of your mat to a forward fold. Let the head hang. Inhale, lift up halfway. Exhale, fold. Inhale, low, slow, light. Come all the way up. Arms up. Hands to the heart. So we have enough time to do one full sun salutation, syncing all of these things together. Trying to maintain that low, slow, light breath. I'm going to cue it the way that I'm doing it, but know that when I'm cueing it, I'm obviously not using low, slow, light breath. So if you need to go slower than the pace that I am using, take that pace. So feet hip distance apart. Ground down through your feet, arms beside your body. Find your cues. Find your low, slow, light breath. Tongue is resting on the roof of the mouth. It supports the nasal cavity. So whenever you can, leave the tongue there, do. When you're ready, low, slow, light, inhale, arms up. Bend your knees, hinge from your hips, quiet, long, slow, exhale to fold. Inhale, slow, low, light, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Bring your hands to the floor. You can either step back to hands and knees or you can step to plank. We're going to pause here for 2 breaths to find that slow, low, light and to find our cues and to challenge your breath. And then you can either bring knees to the floor and do what we've already done, or perhaps exhaling low, slow, light, chaturanga. Drop the hips to the floor, toes point back.
Bring the forehead to the floor. Bring your hands off of your mat in line with your shoulders, up on your fingertips. Elbows above your wrists. Using your low, slow light, begin to lift your head and your chest off the floor. Exhale, release it back down. Keep it quiet. 2 more of these. Notice the tendency to go back to a chest breath. I'm only saying that because that's my tendency. So I'm trying to remember to take it low into my lungs and find that expansion all the way around. Lower the head back to the floor. Hands underneath your shoulders. Light and low. Press up to hands and knees. Tuck the toes under. On your next exhalation, keep it quiet as you lift your hips up and back to downward facing dog. Once you arrive in downward facing dog, find your cues, especially the pelvis and the ribs, which positions the diaphragm in the position to be able to maintain that low, slow light with some awareness of intra-abdominal pressure so that you're not creating more tension than needed, which will inevitably lead to a not low, slow, light breath. Come up onto your toes, gaze between your thumbs. Bend your knees, and at the bottom of your exhale, either step or hop to the front of your mat. Inhale, come up halfway. Slow, quiet exhale, fold. Can you keep that inhale light rather than that big burst of air as you come upright, arms up, and then hands to heart. Notice your heart. Notice your breath, your prana. Notice your chitta, your mind, and the overall quality of your energy. And make your way back down onto the floor to come back into Shavasana, our starting position, but this time legs extended. Resting with arms down beside your body, palms facing up. Noticing as you come down, your natural breath. And start to just follow your exhales. So that quiet, almost no sensation of the air coming out of your nose. Following it all the way down to its natural pause of when you feel that it ends, not forcing any more air out than feels natural. And if there is a pause, notice how long that pause is. And count it.
Just continue to stay with the exhales and the natural pause, if there is a pause that follows. Shift your awareness now to your inhalations. And not with the intent of changing your inhalation, but just noticing what starts to happen as you shift your mind from your exhale to your inhale. What is the natural response of the body? What is the natural response of the breath? What is the natural response of the mind? And when you're ready, bend your knees and roll onto your side body. And make your way into a seated position at your own pace, in your own way of getting there. So yoga, the practice, the physical postures, the pranayama, the study, the philosophy of it, the main goal, the main purpose is to find this place where we can rest within our mind without being distracted by all the mind stuff, the things that are outside of us. And that connection between recognizing what happens to your breath when your mind or your body is active, and how you can use the breath to actually move more into that state of less vritti, less fluctuation, physically, mentally, spiritually. So hopefully there was a part of that experience throughout this practice. And I thank you so much for playing with me, experimenting with me,